A near disaster in the sky, Emirates Flight 407. On the night of Friday, March 20th, 2009, Emirates Flight 407 prepared for takeoff from Melbourne, Australia, bound for Dubai. On board were 257 passengers and 18 crew members, embarking on a 14-hour journey aboard a modern Airbus A340-500, a sophisticated, long-range aircraft with an excellent safety record. The four pilots, two main and two augmenting, were experienced professionals with over 8,000 flight hours each, including extensive time in the A340 and its cousin, the A330. But that night, a series of small, seemingly inconsequential mistakes would almost lead to catastrophe. The pre-takeoff error. As the pilots conducted pre-flight preparations, the first officer entered the aircraft's gross weight into the electronic flight bag, EFB, a tablet designed to calculate critical performance data, like engine thrust, flap settings, and takeoff speed. Unfortunately, he made a simple but critical mistake, entering the weight as 262 tons instead of 362 tons, a full 100 tons lighter than the actual weight. This error cascaded through the EFB's calculations, causing it to underestimate the required thrust, flap settings, and takeoff speed. But redundancies in aviation are designed to catch such errors. Multiple checks were in place, checks and distractions. Despite these safeguards, the error went unnoticed. The captain, reviewing the figures, became distracted by conversation in the crowded cockpit and failed to verify the weight. Additionally, the verbal cross-check where pilots confirmed data aloud never occurred. The augmenting crew, tasked with providing additional oversight, faced challenges of their own. The cockpit was crowded with ground engineers, preventing one augmenting pilot from participating fully. The other had to wait outside the cockpit. The rest, according to Emirates Airlines procedures, the augmenting crew had to be in the cockpit for pre-flight preparations as well as during takeoff and landing. Like many other airlines, Emirates believed that the additional pair of eyes and ears could be used on these lengthy flights to provide an additional margin of safety, which makes what's going to happen on the ground all the more confusing. As the passengers filed in and the last of the baggage was loaded, the pilots were busy carrying crucial pre-departure protocols. This crew was highly experienced. The captain and first officer combined had over 8,000 hours of flight time, with thousands of hours in the A340 and many more in the A330, its smaller two-engine cousin. However, on this particular night, their familiarity with a slightly different aircraft would prove to be a crucial advantage out the all-important tasks distinction. The aircraft was bustling with activity during these preparations, with 5 people in the cockpit, 2 pilots, 2 ground engineers, and the augmenting captain. The cockpit was so packed that the first officer had to wait outside in the forward galley for the ground engineers to leave, while the pilots and ground engineers chatted and went over their paperwork. This is where the first officer made a simple but serious mistake. It all began when he entered the aircraft's gross weight, or total weight, into the electronic flight bag, or EFB, which is essentially an iPad that is specific land. When he entered the aircraft's weight, his finger slipped, and instead of typing 362.00 tons lighter than it actually was, he then used the figures the first officer gave the EFB to calculate the flap setting that would be required for takeoff, the thrust setting that would be needed on the engines, and the speed at which the plane would be able to lift off. This indicated that the computer had grossly miscalculated how much power the engines would require to launch the aircraft, dolly made to calculate the days. Despite how serious this error was, there was a high degree of redundancy built into both the aircraft systems and procedures. So the 4 pilots on board would have multiple opportunities to notice this error before they lined up on the runway. It also underestimated the speed needed to get off the ground and the flap setting needed to produce the lift required for takeoff. If you're like me, you probably think that most web browsers are a little out of date by now. It seems like the internet has become much more dynamic and lively in recent years, yet web browsers like Chrome and Safari are still somewhat difficult to use, which is why I prefer Opera One. It is essentially the web browser equivalent of the Airbus A340. No matter how many tabs I have open, I can easily locate all of the apps I use thanks to the sleek, modern UI. For example, let's assume I'm researching one of these videos and I want to share something intriguing I come across on Instagram or Twitter. Sorry, X. It's very quick and flawless, and I love that it has an integrated VPN and ad blocker that I can activate with a single click. I can post anything by simply clicking those icons on the sidebar, and I can respond to messages promptly by opening Facebook Messenger or What's For. Those who have too many tabs open at once, the Tab Islands feature is very helpful. I can group similar tabs together and expand and shrink them as needed, which really helps me organize my work and saves a lot of space. I also like that Opera's AI section is integrated into the browser itself. So you can ask it, try Upper One, using my link in the video description so you can see what I'm talking about for yourself. But first, let's get back to the video. The captain took the EFB and started verifying the entered figures. App, I am among, by the initial officer. In the meantime, the first officer started recording these numbers into his copy of the flight plan. However, as the pilots were working on this, the captain became sidetracked by a remark made by another passenger on the flight deck. And although answering it, he never finished his checks. Had he would have learned that the first officer had input the incorrect weight for the aircraft, and as a result, all of the numbers the EFB had produced for the aircraft's performance during takeoff were wrong. Importantly, at this point, both pilots were supposed to verbally confirm that the takeoff weight entered into the AFB and the figure written into the flight plan by the first officer matched. This vital check would evidently show that the first officer had entered the incorrect figure into the EFB, one that was 100 tons lighter than the figure in the flight management computer. However, this verbal confirmation never occurred, and there was now one less check bet. Even as the 257 passengers were settled in, they were unaware that a minor fault was creeping through the holes in the cockpit with frightening ease. As their checks came to a close, the pilots had one more opportunity to identify their error. This is a photocopy of the first officer's flight plan. He read out the takeoff weight figure, saying 326.0 tons off, changing the 2 to a 3 before reading out the correct figure from the flight management computer. The captain then verified that the figures from his copy of the flight plan matched those in the computer, between the pilots and the pilots.